these Sonys have incredible imaging, incredible sound staging, incredible fidelity. I really think this is perhaps Sony's best speaker ever. Today, I'm wearing my Sony hat because we're talking about Sony's ultimate desktop near-field monitor, the Sony SA-Z1. Now, this came out about 4 or 5 years ago, and it was meant to be a cost, no-object product. And it was a complete system, including a built-in DSD DAC, and get this, 8 GaN FET amplifiers total, 4 per channel. This came in at an extremely high retail price, originally of $8,000. Now, I don't think Sony actually thought that they were going to sell a lot of these. I mean, how many people are willing to spend $8 grand for a small near-field monitor for your computer system? But it was also designed that it could be used for music mixing, mastering, except it had one huge flaw, well, in my estimation anyway, and that was the fact that it had no subwoofer out. And they're meant to be used in a very, very specific configuration, basically on a desk so that it can get some bass reinforcement from being on that desk and placed 4 inches from the wall. So again, it could get some bass reinforcement because this ultimate monitor only has 2 4-inch woofers per side. So it was never really meant to provide a lot of bass, but what bass is there is actually really, really good. And it has these amazing different DSP settings so that you can use one woofer, you can use both woofers, you can use 2 different types of amplifiers built in, an analog amplifier, a digital amplifier. You can use one to kind of correct the other or use them both in tandem. There are a lot of settings on here. And there's also a very, very innovative tweeter system, which is actually a line array. You'll notice there's a main tweeter flanked above and below by 2 ancillary tweeters. And this creates essentially a line array. And there's also some DSP settings that allow you to actually delay the 2 ancillary tweeters, delay or advance them. There's all sorts of options on this. However, in my application on this desktop system, which is actually a DaVinci Resolve post-production suite, which is meant for video editing, color grading, sound mixing and sweetening. In this particular configuration, I didn't have the room to put it in Sony's recommended settings, meaning sitting on a desk 4 inches from the back wall. So I actually had to put them on these stands to get them above my monitors, and clearly there's no desk for them to sort of resonate against, and they're much further from the back wall than suggested. So they really didn't provide much bass, and there wasn't a tremendous amount of bass to begin with. So in this configuration, they truly, truly require a subwoofer, except for the fact that Sony left absolutely no provisions for a subwoofer out. They actually did not want the public to add bass to this unit for fear that they would kind of mess up the sound. So Sony provided no actual way of adding bass to this particular speaker. There's lots of different inputs. There's USB inputs, there's optical inputs, there's analog inputs, balanced and unbalanced. So there's a lot of interesting things you can do with the speaker except add bass to it. But I knew that in my particular configuration, the bass would not be adequate because, as I said, they're not on a desk and they're not near the back wall. So what I actually did was using a very interesting feature of Apple's Mac OS operating system, their MIDI audio control panel, where you can actually gang 2 different USB DACs together and synchronize them. And using those 2 different DACs, one which was built into the Sony SA-Z1, and another USB DAC, which is my professional DAC, which is the RME UFX, which is actually an analog to digital converter and a digital to analog converter as well. But the interesting thing about this RME DAC is that it comes with this very sophisticated total mix software, which is like a routing mixer, but it also has a delay built into it. So what I was actually able to do was to delay the signal from the subwoofers to match the delay that happens in the Sony SA-Z1's internal DACs because of its DSP functions. And I don't believe that I've ever heard of anyone actually taking this Sony SA-Z1 desktop monitor and marrying it with a subwoofer to create a complete full range system. Obviously, for the retail price of $8,000, Sony was going to build this monitor system to an extremely high level, and it uses an all aluminum chassis with floating panels that are decoupled from the core aluminum chassis and two opposing 4-inch woofers per side, which, if you've been following technology, GaN FET amplifiers are sort of a fairly new breed of topology in amplifier design, and it sounds fantastic. It's very warm and sweet and tube-like, but with the control and the extension of solid state. So it's a really interesting hybrid. Honestly, I thought by this point in the evolution of audio that many, many more companies would have gone over to GaN FET technology, because even companies like Atmosphere that really just made two products have embraced GaN FET technology, and it supposedly sounds extremely tube-like. So why did I choose this particular Sony monitor, even though I knew that it was sort of an incomplete system because it had no subwoofer output, or at least incomplete as I planned to use it? Now, at the original $8,000 price, I would not have been a buyer of this system at all. I wouldn't have been interested about it. And actually, luckily, I didn't even know about it. And it just so happened that about 6 months ago or so, I was doing some research and I found out about these particular monitors. And I said, you know what? Let me jump onto eBay, see if anybody's selling them used or something like that. Let me see, maybe I can get a good deal on them. I'm really interested in the technology, but at the retail price, I mean, that's just insane. So I happened to notice that Sony was now closing out these monitors, and the price had dropped to about, fluctuates between $4,000 to $5,000, but that was still too much for me, and I happened to find an open box for much, much less than that. Still expensive, but I thought that, especially with a 30-day trial period, let me bring them in here, let me test them out, let me see if they're really as good as Sony made them out to be. And actually, before ordering them, I corresponded with some users, and people were like, yes, these monitors, within their limits of what they can do, are fantastic. And one user who has a YG speaker system, very large, very expensive, all aluminum cabinet, said that he felt that his Sony SAZ1s give as much enjoyment listening to music as his main huge YG system. So that really made me interested in how I could use these Sony SAZ1s, complementing them with bass, in my system. And I wanted them for two kind of specific reasons. One was to monitor the audio for my video editing post-production system. But the other real reason why I wanted such expensive speakers was that sometimes late at night, it's not possible with other family members to listen to loud music, to play my main system. And so a near-field system like the Sony seemed very, very attractive because I could listen late at night to music and really enjoy it and hear staging and imaging and all the audiophile aspects that I wasn't quite frankly getting from my previous monitor system, which was from Genelec. And as you may or may not know, Genelec makes some very, very high quality monitor systems which are used in the video production world, the audio production world. I mean, they're really sort of an industry standard. Now, I didn't have the top Genelecs. I had the 8020s with the 7050 subwoofer, so it wasn't that high in the Genelec line, but certainly provided a lot of what Genelecs do. And they did sound quite good, and they were perfect for my music mixing purposes, but I was really looking for the depth and the clarity and the sound staging and the imaging that my main system does, but something that I could play at a much lower volume late at night. And the interesting thing is that these Sonys want to be set up about 28 inches apart, and they want you to listen to them no more than 3 feet. So it's not as if it doesn't make noise outside of that equidistant triangle, but that's really the sweet spot, and it's really only designed for one listener, near-field monitoring, at a maximum distance of about 3 or 3.5 feet from the monitors themselves. But man, when you are sitting in the sweet spot, it is just fantastic, and it gives me just as much enjoyment as my big main system. But of course, that's adding the subwoofers. Now for subwoofers, I chose kind of an interesting design. Now this being a desktop system, I didn't have a lot of space, and I wanted subwoofers that would fit on the bottom level of my desk itself. And I did a ton of research, And what I came up with is a very interesting product from KEF called the KC62. And these are about the smallest subwoofers that I've really ever heard about. They're 9 inches by 9 inches by 9 inches. And they're all aluminum, like the SAZ1. And they have a built-in amplifier, of course, and built-in crossover, and built-in DSP. So I felt that they were really potentially interesting product to pair with these. And once I actually got the Sony monitors in place and the subwoofers hooked up with them and dialed in the right crossover and the right EQ settings, it's just an incredibly impressive system in a very small space. I can actually close the door, and outside it can barely be heard. It doesn't disturb anybody else in the house, and I can enjoy music midnight, 1 a.m., as late as I want. These Sonys had to really perform at an extremely high level for me to get rid of my Genelec monitors. And man, these Sonys have incredible imaging, incredible sound staging, incredible fidelity. And Sony seemed to hit the nail right on the head with this ultimate design. I really think this is perhaps Sony's best speaker ever. And I had the opportunity many years ago to listen to Sony's floor-mounted high-end speaker system that I think at the time was around $22,000. But I think that this Sony SAZ1 surpasses any of their efforts. This thing is just phenomenal, especially when you add extremely high-quality dual-channel subwoofers to them. It really creates a complete system with full sound staging, full depth, full height cues, and unsurpassed fidelity in a very small form factor. I'll be doing some future videos about these Sony SAZ1s and compare and contrast what I'm hearing in this tiny little near-field monitor system versus what I hear with my main system. So if you enjoy hearing about crazy moonshots like Sony's $8,000 SAZ1 system, please consider hitting the subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and please come back.